everybody. Welcome to another episode from Your Own Pathway, the place where truth meets transformation. And here we build foundations and we break generational patterns. So if you're ready to stop performing and start leading, you're in the right place. So let's own it. Let's we're going to be very, I don't want to say sassy, but we're going to talk about something that has been very much weaponized since I think COVID here. Okay, so COVID happened almost holy crap. I almost said holy shit. I probably should have said just holy shit, but COVID happened about what? Almost 6 years now. So we're at the end of the year and um there are a lot of things that happened during COVID that I think brought a lot of light into a lot of things that was wrong system wise, and there were a lot of things that good things that came out of COVID, and also I think a lot of things that I wouldn't say bad, but we've held on to a lot of things since COVID. And one of the things that I want to talk about was, with COVID, mental health and mental health awareness became more acceptable and more talked about. But I've also noticed, especially 5 6 years later, that with social media, TikTok, Instagram, um, YouTube, but especially like TikTok and Instagram for younger people, that mental health has been very weaponized as an excuse for people's bad behavior. And most of the time, the people who are using mental health and their diagnosis as their bad behavior have actually not been diagnosed by an actual mental health practitioner. So today we're getting right into it and why your diagnosis is not an excuse for your bad behavior. All right. So I want to explain first thing is a diagnosis isn't something that you pick up from TikTok, which I know a lot of people do, or a trending mental health post, which I know a lot of people do. And I know mental health is very much a vibe, and there are lots of buzzwords right now that are being used, some in the correct context and some that are just so far off. I'm like, how in the world did you get that diagnosis based on what and where? And a mental health diagnosis is a professional evaluation that is done through assessment, history, observation, and sometimes even a medical or psychological testing. Okay, so, and I say all of this. I say all of this with compassion. I say all this with not to criticize, but a lot of people today are self diagnosing because they see themselves in these short clips and reels or lists online. While that curiosity can be the doorway to having self awareness, it's not the same thing as a professional diagnosis. So, until you've been actually evaluated and diagnosed by a professional, by a licensed professional, you can't really claim that diagnosis and certainly not use it to justify how you treat other people and in situations, okay? Even when you do have a professional diagnosis that is actually diagnosed, okay, it doesn't give you the permission to weaponize it or excuse disrespectful, harmful, or manipulative behavior. Yes, your diagnosis can explain your patterns, but it cannot excuse your actions. The purpose of being diagnosed is to heal, not to harm. And that is what we are exactly unpacking today. So, first part, okay? Something that really needs to talk about is what is so common in today's mental health conversations is using your diagnosis, or even worse, your self-diagnosis as a permission slip for poor behavior. I see it online all the time. I hear it in conversations with my previous clients. They'll say things like, well, I'm blunt because I have ADHD, or I shut down because I have trauma, or I ghost people because I have anxiety. I can't help that I have a temper. It's just my depression, and that's why I strike out. Now, while I understand where that comes from, trust me, I do, that kind of reasoning quietly reinforces the idea that we're powerless because of our patterns. I want to say this: you're not powerless. Your diagnosis can explain why you respond the way you do, but it cannot excuse how you choose to act. Okay, I'll say it again. It can help you respond. I mean, it cannot excuse how you choose to act. And that is the difference right there, is between awareness and accountability. Having a diagnosis doesn't make you broken. It doesn't make you bad. But hiding it to avoid responsibility, repair, or reflection, that is where the harm begins. Healing isn't about understanding your pain, it's about transforming your response to it. So, today, we're going to get real about what true ownership looks like. Because let's be honest, healing without accountability is just self sabotage dressed up as having self awareness. So let's start here. Your diagnosis is meant to help you heal, not hold other people hostage. As a licensed psychotherapist and empowerment coach, I've seen people feel immense relief after being diagnosed. It's like, wow, finally I have clarity and I have language for what I've been feeling. And maybe that explains the chaos, or, it gives me so much clarity and I feel so much relief about um, what I've been going through, and it really softens the self blame. But understanding is only the first step. Step two is taking responsibility for how you show up. Compassion without accountability becomes complacent. When we stop at just, this is how I am, or I this is who I am because of my diagnosis, what happens is we close the door on growth. Yes, your diagnosis may influence your behavior, but it doesn't remove your agency, because you still get to choose how you respond, how you communicate, and how you repair. By owning your diagnosis means that you're learning how to work with it and not just use it as a weapon. And how can you do this? Like, how can you take accountability? Well, that might mean going to therapy, learning coping tools, coping skills, setting boundaries, or simply be honest about what you can handle. And again, accountability is not punishment, it's self respect in action. And that's how emotional maturity also looks like. And this is what it means to own it. Mean to own your diagnosis, but not make it your whole identity and say, you know what? Yes, I have this, and I'm not going to let it define me. So moving on, like, what is the fine line between awareness and avoidance? I think this is the juicy part here, okay? So awareness, I felt like I said awareness. Awareness is one of the most powerful steps in healing, but awareness without responsibility turns into avoidance. And you can be aware that you struggle with anxiety, but that doesn't mean that you get to lash out at people every time you feel uncomfortable. You can be aware that you have ADHD, but that doesn't stop you from showing up to your commitments. And you can be aware that you've experienced trauma, but that doesn't make you, that doesn't give you the right to project your pain onto everyone around you. I know that's hard to hear, but It's the truth and it sets you free. Because awareness should lead to accountability, not avoidance. Too many people stop at awareness and they say, I have this diagnosis, or that's just how I am. And while naming it brings up the relief, it doesn't stop. And by identifying the wound, but refusing to clean it. Think about it this way: awareness is having a flashlight, and accountability is the healing. So when you understand your diagnosis, that's your invitation to do the work, which may mean learning your triggers, regulating your nervous system, seeking therapy or coaching, practicing repair, and communicate your needs, honesty. Avoidance, on the other hand, sounds like, well, I can't help it, or that's just my trauma response, or if people really cared, they'll accept me as I am. But self awareness is not just a substitute for self responsibility. Yes, your diagnosis make the work harder, but it doesn't make it impossible. You can honor your truth while still being accountable for your impact. You can have compassion for yourself without using it to justify cruelty or chaos. Because growth isn't just about fixing yourself, it's about owning how you show up. There is a fine line between awareness and avoidance, and it is in the line between talking about your healing and living your healing. Awareness is like opening the door, and accountability means, you know what? I open the door and I'm going to walk through it. And that's where your power lies, is not in knowing your history, but in rewriting it. Okay, so moving on to part three, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the harm in weaponizing mental health, and especially mental health language. And social media has made terms like boundaries, toxic, triggered, and gaslighting part of everyday vocabulary. And of course, while that has opened up conversations about mental health, it's actually blurred a lot of lines. What was meant to carry empathy has turned into a shield for entitlement. I've seen people use their diagnosis to silence accountability, to manipulate. And when I say manipulate, I see like the manipulation in relationships, or to shut down any form of feedback. I see comments and I hear comments like, oh, you can't say that to me. I have trauma. Or if you challenge me, you're not supporting my mental health. Or, they might sound protective, but often they're deflective. And one word I heard a lot was trigger. And, when I was going through my social work clinical program or my supervision, one of the things that they said in class was, don't use the word trigger because you're going to trigger people. And at that time I was like, oh, okay, all right, that's respecting people. But now I'm like, why can't we say the word trigger? And if I do say the word trigger, I challenge you to look inside and have the self-awareness to dissect what it is about the word trigger that actually triggers you. So instead of deflecting, actually look into and figure out why. Why does this word actually trigger you? So when we weaponize our diagnosis, we're not protecting our peace. We're actually avoiding our growth. And here's the hard truth is, so when we weaponize our diagnosis, we're not protecting our peace, we're avoiding our growth. And here is the hard truth: that avoidance just doesn't hurt others, it keeps us stuck. Because healing requires humility. It asks is us to say, yes, I've been through things, but I still have to take responsibility for how I treat people. Mental health awareness is meant to build bridges, not walls. When used properly, your diagnosis actually becomes a compass for compassion, both for yourself and others. But when misused, it becomes a sword that cuts connection. True healing doesn't weaponize pain, it transforms it into empathy. It doesn't say I'm untouchable because of my trauma. It says I understand my trauma and I choose not to pass it on. And that is the difference. That is the difference between emotional awareness and emotional responsibility. That is the real work. Not to use your diagnosis as a defense, but to use it as a direction. So, let's talk about the power of ownership and growth. Ownership is where true healing begins. It's where you move from simply knowing better to actually doing better, okay? I know we say, well, you know what? I hear that so much all the time. Well, they didn't know better. Okay, I understand they didn't know better, but you know what? They can definitely do better. It's not about guilt, it's not about shame, it's about reclaiming your power and your choices. Owning your diagnosis means saying, yes, this is a part of me, but it does not control or define me. It means taking radical responsibility for your growth while still holding compassion for your pain. Because accountability doesn't erase empathy, it actually deepens it. Growth happens when you stop outsourcing your self awareness and start practicing it. When you stop saying, this is just how I am, and start asking, how can I show up better for myself and for the people who love me? It's about apologizing when you've hurt someone, even if you were triggered. It's saying, that wasn't okay, and I'm learning to handle things differently next time. It's recognizing the self awareness without change. And here's the thing about this is very present day in today's culture is this idea of clapping back. Like everything like, oh yeah, I'm gonna clap back at you. We are all about clapping back. And we see it everywhere. The urge to have the last word, the urge to post a perfect comeback, to prove that we're unbothered, and yet we're clearly bothered. If we have to respond, we are clearly bothered. So, and don't get me wrong, I stand up for people standing up for themselves, for advocating for themselves, for setting boundaries and using their voice in a empowering way. But growth also means knowing when your silence is your strength. And I know that is hard for a lot of people, but sometimes no response is the most powerful response. And I know a lot of people view that as weakness, but it's actually not weakness. That's self regulation. That's emotional awareness in action. It's saying, okay, I see my trigger, I feel it rising, but I don't need to engage. That is a moment of pause, and that's ownership. That's you choosing to protect your peace over proving your point. That is a quiet confidence of knowing that not every situation deserves your reaction, especially when it comes at the cost of your mental well being. And honestly, I am learning a lot of that as I continue to put out content and putting myself out there. I have to be very discerning about my reactions and how I wish to proceed to if I even need to respond or not. And I'm finding that, you know what, lots of times I don't need to respond. My episodes were the response. So, growth is not always loud. Sometimes it's calm, grounded, and graceful. It's in the deep breaths, the boundaries, and the restraint. And it's not the clapbacks. Because real power is not how you define yourself, but in how you center yourself. The real work of ownership is often invisible and it happens mostly in silent, where you choose peace over ego, accountability over argument, and understanding over being reactive. The thing is, you always won't be right, and you know what? That's okay. You'll definitely stumble. You'll have days where your triggers speak more than your truth does. But every time you choose awareness and accountability, you are teaching yourself what regulation feels like. Now that is growth. That's leadership and that's emotional evolution. Because when you own your diagnosis and your reactions, you take the steering wheel back. You stop being the victim of your own story and you start being the author of your transformation. And when you live in that space where compassion meets accountability, you not only heal yourself, but you become safer for others also. And so that's what growth looks like. That's what peace feels like. And that's what it means to truly own it. So, to close this episode, I just want to remind everybody you are not your diagnosis, you are the author of what comes next. Yes, your diagnosis might explain your pain, but it does not define your potential. Yes, your triggers might be part of your story, but they don't have to be the ending. Healing isn't just about naming what is broken, it's about learning how to build something stronger in its place. And your healing is not measured by how well you explain your wounds, but by how you deeply transform your behavior. The true sign of growth isn't how loudly you announce your boundaries or how fiercely you define your pain. It's how you quietly regulate, how you gracefully respond, and how you intentionally choose peace. Because that right there is the real power. The moment when you realize that healing doesn't give you permission to escape accountability. What it does is it gives you the capacity to embody it. You can be healing and you can still be responsible. You can be human and still be kind. You can have flaws and still have integrity. So, everyone, let us stop using our diagnosis as a shield. Start using it as a map. Let it guide you towards self awareness, self regulation, and self respect. Because when you own your story, you take back your power and you own it. You own your story, you own your healing, you own your accountability, and most important, you own your power. So, that is all I have for you all today. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if this episode spoke at all to you, hit the like button, subscribe, and of course, share it with anybody who you feel could benefit from this episode. So, again, this is your own pathway where we don't hide behind labels and we grow beyond them. So, own it, and I'll see you all next time. Take care.